Welcome to the Choose FI radio podcast. We view the concept of financial independence as a life optimization strategy that helps you crush the game using a mixture of conventional and unconventional methods. My name is Jonathan Mendonza, a pharmacist pursuing financial independence, and my co-host name is Brad Barrett, a CPA turned entrepreneur who reached financial independence through diligent savings and online business ventures. We host a twice-a-week show on Mondays and Fridays that focuses on living below your means, creating multiple income streams, straightforward investment strategies, tax optimization hacks, and travel rewards. This is what winning looks like. Welcome to the show.
You're listening to Choose FI Radio. The blueprint for financial independence lives here. If you're looking to unlock the secrets to financial independence and early retirement, you're in the right place. Stay tuned and join a community of like-minded people who are getting off the hamster wheel and taking control of their lives in the pursuit of financial independence. Choose FI, your home for financial independence online.
Hey guys, welcome to the show. We are going to be speaking with Travis Hornsby from studentloanplanner.com today. This is an episode that honestly, if I had had this 10 years ago, 13 years ago, 14 years ago, I would probably be several $100,000 richer at this point. That's how important this particular conversation is. We're going to be talking about what does the individual do when they have $200,000, $300,000, $500,000 of student loan debt. And we're going to dig even deeper into this idea of how to prevent going there in the first place. It's a fascinating conversation. And to help me with this, I have my co-host Brad here with me today. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing quite well, Jonathan. Yeah, this should be a really solid episode. I've been looking forward to this for a while. We had Physician on Fire actually recommended Travis to us and said, he's a really smart guy. He's got an amazing story. You need to get him on. So those are certainly big words from Physician on Fire. And we looked into Travis's story, and it really is remarkable. He had a mini retirement at 25. He worked for Vanguard. He helps people save hundreds of thousands of dollars on student loans. This story has it all. And I mean, frankly, Jonathan and I were trying to figure out how we put this into one episode. This could be 3 episodes easily. So this should be jam-packed with information. So good stuff all around. And with that, Travis, welcome to the show.
Great to be here.
Travis, when I think of your story, I think of someone that totally failed at retirement. You know, as I was learning more and more about you and kind of your past, your history and what you documented, this is someone that definitively said, hey, I am 25 years old and I am retired. And as it turns out, you are busier than ever with multiple projects. I'd love to hear the origin story of this and what happened.
Yeah, well, I wrote a book about it, and I'm going to regret writing this book probably, but I called it 25 is the New 65, with the idea being that I found Mr. Money Mustache sitting in my cubicle in 2013 at Vanguard, and it was, good job, like definitely a good job for somebody that wanted to live a traditional lifestyle, but man, just the corporate environment was not for me. And I was sitting there feeling like, maybe I'd made some big mistake, or maybe there was something wrong with me. Why in the world was I not super excited to jump up out of bed and go to work? And then I discovered those ideas around financial independence and decided I have to do something about this. So I decided to save about 65% of my income. I lived in unfinished basements. I lived in a house with 5 guys in 1 bathroom. I drove a really old car, never really bought my lunch except for one-offs and everything. And I just tried to maximize my savings rates. And at the point where I was 25, during that 2012 to 2015 period, the stock market had an incredible bull run, right? So there was 1 year where I saved over 100% of my salary because the S&P 500 went up like 35%. And, I saved 65 or something like that. And I remember having a percentage of what I needed to achieve FI. And my thought was, if I don't feel fulfilled and I'm not really loving life right now, why would I wait to 100% FI? Mr. Money Mustache is making all this money on his blog, and he's just having fun. So maybe something like that will happen to me, and maybe I should just take a risk.
And what stands out is that you are using the language that we talk about now in terms of lean FI. You are incorporating that into your own life and just saying straight, this is good enough. I'm just retired and I'll figure it out.
Yeah, exactly. So I had the idea. I just decided I was going to write a book about it. So I was having to wake up at like 5 a.m. because I was living in downtown to kind of be where the action was. And I just wrote this I call it really more like a pamphlet, going back and forth to work. And it was a little angry, I was just kind of mad at the world. And somebody said something recently, like, if you are not super happy before FI, you're going to have that same attitude after FI. And so you have to make sure that, you have just a positive attitude about everything. But what was interesting is when I finally had a goal behind what I was doing, I felt so fulfilled, and I started to do so great at my job. It was kind of interesting. Like, before, I was just kind of wallowing in self-pity, honestly, and I wasn't performing at the level I should have been. And then finally, when I decided, you know what, I actually picked a date. I was like, I'm going to quit my job on this date. I just started blowing it out of the park. And then people started saying, wow, like, you're doing so amazing. And, and the funny thing is like, I wasn't even doing all the typical corporate things, like showing up super early to work and working really long hours. Like, I was just crushing it because I had a purpose behind the way I was working.
Travis, this is fascinating because many people that are hearing this are thinking this is the story. You got your dream job at Vanguard. You hear about us rave over and over again that VTSAX, right? And we sometimes get accused of being a little bit pigeonholed on this particular idea, but you've already got the job at Vanguard and you're finding yourself, in your words, just uninspired. I think that's remarkable. And it's also interesting to see that getting the perfect job isn't always the answer. Sometimes it's about finding fulfillment.
Exactly. And, at the end of the day, Vanguard is an outstanding company. And I love the people that I worked with there. And there's some extremely talented people that are serving shareholders and making us all richer, right? But it's still a corporation. So regardless of, if you're working at your dream job, wherever you think it might be, there's certain kinds of employers. And a company that has to be very careful with what they let people do with their portfolios and what kind of corporate culture they allow, so they don't have any people that are kind of like a London whale kind of a person, that, you know what I mean? So the corporate culture is very it's very conservative, and it's a big company. I think that I would have had the exact same experience if I'd worked for another great company that happened to be really large. So it wasn't at all a reflection on them. It was just a reflection on just me and my personality.
Hey, Travis, I have a couple questions based on some of the things you said in the last 5 minutes. I'm just fascinated by the story. So you said something to the effect of, I decided to save 65%. And I think that was basically as you found Mr. Money Mustache. And I'm curious what your financial life looked like immediately prior to that. Like, what were you doing? What was your savings rate? Like, was this that kind of an aha moment that you went from minimal savings rate up to 65, or were you always a saver?
Well, I think that I have to take it back a little ways to make the story make sense. I grew up with, my grandfather was kind of my idol, and he grew up in the middle of the Great Depression and had his farm repossessed by the bank because his dad was a principal and they got paid with IOUs, and so the bank wouldn't accept it, so they foreclosed on the farm. So he was extremely frugal, drove like 20-year-old cars, like went up in the attic to flush his own air conditioning, just very, very amazing man. And he kind of instilled those values in me. And so I've always been extremely frugal because I just had a very close relationship with my granddad and want to be just like him, right? So my dad's a teacher and my mom is a nurse. And when I was growing up, my mom had some health complications and didn't work. And so when I was going to college, I had to do it on my own. I kind of knew that because I had a couple brothers too. And if I wanted to go to college, a good one, then I needed to go on scholarship. So what I did is I actually formed all of my college search around the idea, can I go for free? That was basically the idea. Yeah, I heard that Harvard at the time had some sort of program that if your family made less than a certain amount of money, then you could go for free. And a lot of these other sort of schools have these top scholarship programs that you can get, and they cover everything. And so I applied to all these different ones and got in everywhere. Except got, waitlisted at Harvard, dadgummit. But I did end up getting the top scholarship at my state's flagship university and got some other scholarships to go to these other places. But it was kind of funny because I remember like one of them was Vanderbilt and they gave me this big fancy package and it was like $80,000 scholarship. I was like, wow, that's so much money, And then I looked at the financial aid package and then I noticed it was like $45,000 a year minus $20,000 equals 25. And I was like, it's still $25,000 a year, So I just decided to go to this state university. And that really kind of is what set me up for being able to even try to retire at 25.
Wow, that's fascinating. So I want to hear about the scholarship that you received at the flagship university in your state. That sounds fascinating to me. And how, as a 17-year-old kid, did you have the knowledge and the wherewithal to make that decision to turn down these much more prestigious schools? Like, I'm sure there's some type of societal pressure to make you go there, right? Like, that's just the way it works. Oh, I got into Dartmouth or Brown or wherever. Like, it's hard to turn that down and go to the state school. Did that ever cross your mind?
I just got extremely lucky, honestly, because I remember some of the admissions officers visited our school and they, were making jokes with us and talking about the Superbad was like the hot new movie at the time. And they were making jokes about that movie and showing us all these beautiful pictures of their campus. And the scholarship that I got paid for 4 international trips abroad during school and room and board and tuition. And so that, was just a really cooler experience. So we got to go to like South Africa and Mexico and the Middle East and different places. So luckily that scholarship was like cool enough that as a starry-eyed 17-year-old kid that would totally, be a sucker for cool, that drew me in that way. But I'm so grateful that I did because of making that decision. I ended up getting paid to go to school because the scholarships basically stacked on top of each other. So I ended up graduating university. Instead of having a bunch of student loans, I had maybe 40 to 50,000 in net worth at that point at 22.
I'm convinced that if you were in my cohort of friends, if you were one of the 5 people that I spent more time with at that same point in time as a starry-eyed 17-year-old, that I could have been in a similar position. Yet in my senior class in high school, I literally found out what the word Google was. That was the first time I'd heard it, was in English class, senior year of high school. And I honestly was not aware that there even was a list of the top 75 schools in the country and what the process would be to get into those schools. I think my options were community college, the expensive state school, or the less expensive state school. That was my framework that I was working from. And I say that not with any sort of, bitterness or anything else other than you clearly latched onto the fact that there was a second dimension of this. And if you knew how the game worked, then you could win. And I'd love slow down just a little bit and extract some actionable tips for our audience that's listening to this saying, yes, that's me. I relate to what Jonathan just said. What the heck am I doing? I have 2 kids that are going to be applying to college in the next couple of years. Where do I start?
I think you got to instill a sense of ownership in them. That's one thing that my parents did really, really well. The best, most productive points of my life have been when I've had a sense of desperation. That's when I've achieved the most. So when I was in high school, I joke with people that it was like my golden years because I had no choice. Like if I wanted to go to a good school and not be a financial burden to my parents so that my brothers could go to college, I had to succeed. And so I just worked like crazy. I took all these extra classes online to try to boost my GPA because each school got to nominate one person for the scholarship that I wanted. I knew that if I didn't have this list of credentials, I wasn't going to get chosen. For people out there who have kids, they're like, hey, I really want them to apply for scholarships. Make sure that they know that you're not giving them a blank check and encourage them to find the college that they like and tell them that they're going to have to pay for it. And then maybe take that promise back later, but scare them enough to make them think that they're going to be responsible for it, because then they're going to look into all kinds of options that's going to give them ownership over their education. And I think they'll value it more.
Travis, I'm curious if you looked into scholarships at other universities, or I guess subsequently in your life in the student loan world, have you encountered other scholarships like this? Is this just like a one-off thing at your particular state university, or is this something that's fairly common across, I guess, state universities? And are there private universities that give full scholarships as well?
Oh yeah, this is very common. Now they're very difficult to get in some cases, but sometimes not so much. So for example, when I was applying to different places, I randomly found, the University of Alabama, right? Everybody knows that's a football school, but they were really trying to boost their academic profile because they had a lot of wealthy donors that were trying to improve the academic side of the school. And they were giving out room, board, and tuition to anybody who could claim that they were a national merit semifinalist. So like one test, if you got a good enough score, randomly gets you a full ride scholarship at a top 100 university in the country, right? So there was other schools that I applied to. They happened to have these special scholarships that paid for everything. I maybe found like 6 or 7 or 8. They're usually housed in the honors college if the college has an honors college, and they're usually funded by the endowments. But a lot of people just don't know these things exist. And if you were a parent of like freshman kids in high school, you have to have what you would expect you'd have to get one of these scholarships. You have to have good grades, and you have to do well in this national merit test. And there's was a bidding war when I was around for students for certain academic credentials. It's kind of like they do this for law schools too. For people that apply to law schools, they basically will give you full tuition or a partial tuition scholarship based off of how much your credentials help lift up the average scores of the class to make their college look better. So, maybe you're not a straight A student, maybe you're an AB student. Well, you can still go to probably a pretty decent college and get a really solid scholarship where you're one of those people that's pulling up the average rather than reducing it.
Travis, are there any websites or resources that pool this information, or do you just literally have to hunt and peck as far as finding individual, like the University of Alabama is offering scholarships this year, where do you find that information?
Honestly, I think that you want to have a frank conversation with your school's guidance counselor and just tell them, pretend that I'm broke and I have to pay my way through school. What should I do? What should I look for? A lot of times the typical conversation that they have is the parents drive their leased car to the high school office and they meet with the guidance counselor and they have this giant mortgage and they're like, okay, how are we going to finance our way through junior's education, right? That's the typical American experience versus mine was, so my parents have a little bit that they contributed to a 529 or prepaid college plan, but I mostly have to cover this on my own. What are my options? And so our conversation was, here's ROTC programs that you can apply to. Here's some different major college scholarship programs that I've been notified about. So I think the main thing is you have to ask and you have to make it known that that's what you want. If you are seeking to go to the most prestigious school that your grades can get you into, you're not going to get a scholarship and you're probably going to be paying full freight if your family has a certain income level.
Yeah, Travis, this is hitting home for me personally, and this is not something I talk about all that often, certainly on the podcast. When I was 17, I got into a couple of the top 10 or so schools in the country, and I went to a very competitive high school. And, that was it was the Ivy League. It was, the elite schools. And I was just so blinded by that. And I think if I had this information from you, if I had kind of the contrarian thinking that comes from being in the Phi community, I would have made a different choice. It sounds weird to say oh, I could have gotten a full merit scholarship at probably 90+% of the universities in America, but that's probably not that far off. But I was just so blinded by this prestige. And it's just such a missed opportunity, even when your parents are paying for it, right? And my parents didn't pay for all of my college, but they made a significant contribution. And I didn't come out with a lot of loans. And I thought that was just good enough. But to think of all the money that I spent out of pocket nonetheless, that could have all went to my net worth, and I could have come out of college with a significant net worth like you did. And I just want to say it's just such a brilliant way of thinking. And yeah, I mean, this is a huge missed opportunity in my own life. And I hope there are people out there that are understanding Phi is about thinking differently. You don't need to go to the best school in the country. Try to come out without student loans. It can just make a world of difference in your life. And then obviously student loans are something that you wound up making a career out of. And we'll talk about that later, certainly. But it's just so interesting how you were thinking about this from the time you were 17, essentially.
Yeah. And there's some great academic research that says that for the Ivy League schools, if you apply to an Ivy League school, they did this study where they found that people that had applied did exactly the same in life from a success perspective as people that actually went. So it wasn't that you went to these Ivy League schools, it's that you had the ambition and the drive to apply in the first place. So I thought that was really fascinating, that the results of people's success rates were very similar regardless of where they went.
Yeah, that is interesting. I guess other than prestige and maybe connections, right? You're not learning that much more at Brown than you are at the flagship state university, especially if you're in an honors program or something like that, or just any program, frankly. It's what you get out of it. It's what you put into it is what you get out of it. So yeah, that lines up with my understanding of the world pretty significantly. So that's cool to hear.
Yeah, and there's some pretty cool opportunities that I had when I was at this big state university. Like, there's still 50,000 people there, and important people want to visit all the time because of maybe political reasons or just geographic reasons, or they want to get their message out to a big audience, right? So I worked as an assistant to a U.S. senator. I drove around like the head of the Harvard Kennedy School of Government because they needed like a student driver for him while he was on campus. I got to go to these like private meetings with the different sort of institutes on campus. Like one of them was with Sandra Day O'Connor. They had Nicholas Kristof around. So I had all of this amazing FaceTime and opportunities to talk with these world impacting people that I maybe wouldn't have even had if I was just another average person at an Ivy League campus. So I think that people are underestimating the value of an education where the school's massive, they have a lot of resources, and they're always hosting all these interesting people. All you have to do is kind of raise your hand and say, hey, how about me?
It's fascinating. There's so many just actionable tips buried in that. And I love that we're able to take a few minutes and carve that out. I have a feeling that as we get more sophisticated at this messaging, we'll be able to take what you just talked about kind of in passing and dial into what part of this could be replicated for anybody. I'll almost create a game plan for people in our community that are looking to crush this thing, because there's so many different ways of doing it as long as you know what tools are available to you. And I'm constantly astounded at my own personal, at the time, inability to take control of this situation. I almost felt overwhelmed by the options, or in my mind, my inability to have any sort of power on the outcome. And I just kind of took the path of least resistance. And listening to you, it's the exact opposite of that. It's very inspiring. And I hope that more people will benefit just by being able to model some of the behaviors that you just described. Let's not stop here because there's so much more to cover. Let's talk about how the scholarships actually set you up to be able to definitively say, I'm retired at 25, and then admit now that you failed at retirement.
So I left school, right, with this 40, 50,000 net worth. Compared to the average college student, maybe I was only close to $100,000 ahead, right? Which is a significant head start, but it's not insurmountable. So living extremely frugally, I was able to save a lot of money. And then by age 25, I had hit the point where I was maybe like 60% FI on a $20,000 a year spending amount. So I was convinced, after reading all these different blogs, that 20K was enough, right? For me, I guess I wasn't thinking about a wife and kids, but I was convinced that 20K was enough. And so I decided to just walk away at that point where I'd hit that level. And I think that more people in the community, this idea of lean fi, like if you're not happy at your job, but you've made significant financial progress, then I think that you will make more money if you quit accidentally than you ever could imagine. That might be a scary statement, a scary thing for people to think about, but I'm living proof of that. So I quit my job as a bond trader, which is a pretty lucrative job. And basically I found these tickets to Europe. It was WoW Air. It was like $99. I just had a trigger and I was like, I'm buying this ticket. I'm leaving in June 2015 and I'm done. I'm going to do it. And so I finally had a date because I had the airline ticket, right? Never mind that that's a pretty easy ticket to just eat if you change your mind. But for my mind, that was it. That was the date. And so then quit my job, buy a one-way plane ticket to Europe, and I just went. And I traveled all over Scandinavia and Central Europe, and then I ended up in Poland.
What did you do in Poland?
I took a I took a $4 bus trip with leather seats, hostesses, and they were giving us free drinks with the latest in electronic movie entertainment. It was obscene. The idea of living on $20,000 a year in the U.S. is a little intimidating, but goodness sake, some of the places that I went in my year of travel, you could easily live off of maybe $8,000 a year and live probably like a middle class person. So I just traveled to Warsaw, saw the Museum of the Jewish People, went to Krakow, saw the old city, got to actually be very emotional moment, be in the Auschwitz concentration camp and get to learn about that history. And then there were some salt mines there. Just amazing. And then in Ukraine, I got to go there and everybody's like, oh my gosh, you're in the Ukraine? That's so dangerous. But I just stayed in the western half of the country away from where the fighting was. I literally lived on $5 a day and I ate like a king. Beer was like 10 cents. A hostel was like a few bucks. when the Wi-Fi was better than back home.
Wow. All right. So let's dive into your numbers if you don't mind and pull this out, because I'll be honest with you, this is yet again another example of how you were inspired in your early 20s. And I had no idea that people were even doing this. So you say basically, all right, I'm willing to live on $20K a year. How much have you actually have saved when you decided to pull the trigger on just exiting the workforce entirely?
Probably about $230,000.
So $230,000, and you say, all right, I can do this. And it sounds like you're willing to do this for two reasons. One, you're willing to be flexible, and two, you can always go back to work. Was that your general idea?
Yeah. I mean, based off of the $20K a year, I had at least 10 years absent a market crash where I could do anything. In my mind, I passed all of the levels of the Chartered Financial Analyst exam. I was a bond trader. Somebody told me that I could go to Wall Street and get a six-figure job tomorrow if I really wanted it. So I thought, well, shoot, if that's what I could do, if that's the opportunity that I'm leaving behind, and then I could easily pick back up again, and pick up a 60, 70, 80K a year job in my sleep, why shouldn't I take this risk? Like, why shouldn't I see what I'm capable of and travel the world and do all these things that people never do and always say that they wish they had? And I didn't want to live with regret. So I said, let's just do it. Let's go for it.
So Travis, was this a play to just go out and explore the world, or was there some type of business thought that you were going to do something entrepreneurial? I'm just trying to understand your thought process. You just said like, hey, I've got 230K. My life is $20,000 a year at most, probably half that if I'm in Europe. That could last me 10 to 20 years. Were you planning on just drawing this down, or were you taking like the principles of the financial independence community and looking at withdrawal rates and, hey, if I pull out 4%, like it'll mean this? Was there that level of thought, or just talk me through where you intended to go at 25 for like the next handful of years?
To be honest, the experience of working in a job that I wasn't passionate about for 3 years, it sounds really stupid to say this, but it was a traumatic one for me because I thought that this was my dream job. I thought that I was, going to be a CEO of the company one day. That was my path. That was my calling. And then I found out the exact opposite, that I wasn't a good fit for a corporate environment, that I maybe wasn't successful in the traditional sense of the word, in moving up the corporate ladder. The thought process of my mind was honestly just, I just want to live, and I can do this for a long period of time. FI bloggers talk a lot about how oftentimes you'll make money accidentally. So let's see if I can make money accidentally. And I did have a personal finance blog called Millennial Moolah. And I just kind of wrote on that, just kind of whatever I was thinking, just kind of chronicled my thought process. And I didn't really treat it as a business. I just sort of treated it as something for fun. And then I decided I'd write a couple books because I had something to say. So I thought, why not? And the thing that I did try to do with withdrawal rates is I said, okay, 20K a year, I got 10 years. Let me try to live on 60 or 70% of that instead. So over in Europe, over maybe about 4 months, I spent about $3,000 because the WoW Air flight was dirt cheap. And then I was living in $5 to $10 a night hostels, which were really, really good quality in Eastern and Central Europe. I was going to the grocery store, making my own meals, and my withdrawal rate was like unbelievably low. And I was having the time of my life because you can do some amazing things for dirt cheap in parts of the world. And that's something that people that are thinking in terms of US prices really should realize if they really can't stand it anymore and they just want to take a chance and leave their jobs.
Hey, Travis, I just have to jump in with one question that's been on my mind since you mentioned it before about the traumatic experience. And then once you set this date, how you were so free at work. People remarked on like how you were crushing it and you were a different person. It reminds me of the movie Office Space. I don't know if you've seen it, but the main character, Peter, he just basically decides to change everything, right? And they look at him as if he's a superstar, like headed for upper management. Like, I'm curious, in a half joking, but not so much way, like, are there takeaways for people in corporate America who might dislike their job, but can actually change in this way? I know it sounds silly to pattern it off a movie, but you did this in real life and you saw how people reacted differently to you. And I'm curious if you've ever reflected on that and taken any kind of actionable tips out of it.
I think it makes a lot of sense. I think that the whole point of being FI is to be able to have that FU money, right? I mean, most people in America are chained to their jobs. They've got big mortgages. They maybe have the student loan payments. They've got a car payment. They've got a little bit of credit card debt. They barely have $1,000 or $2,000 in the bank. And when you're that financially vulnerable, the employer doesn't have to please you. You have to please the employer. If you're instead dealing from a position of strength where your job is optional, you could completely transform your life by making your job the way you want it to be. So that was the mindset that I had. It was a total shift of mindset where I didn't have to be there anymore. I had a date where I wasn't going to be at the office anymore, and it was just a different mindset. I could work the way I wanted to and not have to worry about impressing somebody by showing up to work at 7 a.m. when we had to be in our seats by 7:30. Do you know what I mean? I didn't have to worry about doing those ridiculous projects that everybody wants us to do because I needed to impress somebody 2 or 3 levels above me. I didn't have to care about that because I wasn't intending on having a long-term career or anything. So weirdly, people respected me for that. They're like, wow, like you don't do this stuff that we think is kind of ridiculous. That's really impressive. You know, it's almost like people want you to fit into that corporate mold, but then when you don't and you're actually still contributing to the team and doing great work, obviously, then they respect that and they want a piece of that. It's just a visceral human desire.
That's amazing. I love that. I'm curious, was it setting the date that really was this paradigm shift for you? Or did it occur like as, we affectionately call it FU money, as you were saving money and you had been saving significantly even during the time where you weren't terribly happy, like did any power accrue to you there? Or was it really like everything shifted once I set that date?
That was at the date. Before that, before I bought the plane ticket, everything was theoretical. When I made that commitment to myself that I was going to quit my job, it was terrifying. I was on an easy path to a really stable, solid 6-figure job without having gone to grad school or anything like that. And that's not something that everybody in the world can say, right? So a lot of people thought I was nuts. A lot of people respected me. There was very much, mixed emotions. Some of the people when I quit, like came over to me and they're like, hey, how do I get your job? You must have, something you're not telling us about, how much you're getting paid or something like that. And it was just amazing to see that everybody that was so, caught up in the rat race, they were just so interested in that. And they were so excited by the idea of potentially doing it themselves. But for whatever reason, personal choices, life circumstances, they didn't feel comfortable taking that step. So I think that for a lot of your community, I bet there's a lot of people out there right now in ChooseFi that are working towards financial independence, that are part of the way there. They're really in a job that's not fulfilling to them. Maybe they've jumped jobs a couple times and they still haven't found that fulfilling job. I would encourage you to believe in yourself and come up with a service or a product that you can sell and give yourself a year or 2 buffer where you're not responsible for achieving that level of success. That was key in my journey. Is I did not have a plan where I immediately had to start making money doing something else because I had this financial buffer. And because I gave myself that freedom, I was able to do something organically, not have to take VC money or anything like that. And then now I'm actually making more money than when I was a bond trader, which I never planned on doing.
This is really remarkable. I want to highlight the contrast here. I think it's important and it'll help us as we transition. You graduated school with no debt, and even more than that, because my understanding is because your scholarship paid in excess of what you needed to live, you actually graduated with a positive net worth. And then you did not have a 6-figure income, but you had a good, maybe above the median average. You saved a significant period, and with the tailwind of the market behind you, you were able to get your net worth all the way up to $230,000. So at the age of 25, you basically have a $230,000 net worth, and you make this lifestyle design choice, which is incredible. And what's really fascinating about this is, in contrast, the people that you're serving, which is, frankly, it's me. I graduated school and I came out with negative 6 figures of student loan debt. I have a massive uphill battle to just get back to broke. And the population that you're serving is in total contrast to the lifestyle choice that you made. What's fascinating about that is that influencers that are putting out information, writing good content, coming up with different podcasts, a lot of it tends to be inherently selfish. It tends to be information that serves you where you are. It's why up to this point, we haven't seen a lot of information about second generation FIRE, because a lot of the early adopters of these concepts that we're writing did not have kids that were needing that information at that point in time. But you have made the opposite choice. My question is, what we're about to dive into, all of the ideas involving how to help someone that's 6 figures in student loan debt, none of the information that we've covered up to this point helps that person. What made you decide to dedicate your life to helping this particular segment of the population?
it was my wife. She came to me when we were starting to date more seriously, and we had a conversation, and she's like, by the way, I have 6 figures in med school debt. And I said, debt, what's that? She showed me her login and she showed me the balance, and my jaw dropped a little bit. And I was just thinking, oh my gosh, this doesn't change how I feel about you, but I want to try to come up with a plan of how we pay this back. So because I was a bond trader, I was really good with Excel, and I decided I was going to build a model for her to help her figure out all the different routes that she had to pay it back. I was thinking it was pretty straightforward, just refinance, pay it back as quickly as possible. But then I discovered there was all these different payment programs that you could pay based on your income, and you could go for loan forgiveness, and you just had all these choices. And it just seemed so complicated. And we finally settled on, for us, we felt like the right path was just to go ahead and pay it back as fast as possible with a 5-year repayment plan. But I remember it was just very challenging. And then she had a friend who was a veterinarian who had $380,000 of student loan debt. And she was going to have a job starting off making about $80,000 a year. And she just didn't know what to do. She was just paralyzed. She got her statement. She was just so scared. My wife, Christine, she told me, hey, Travis, you should talk to our friend and see if she'll pay you for making a plan to pay off her $380,000 of student loan debt. And I said, pay me? Like, I don't do side hustles. Like, what? That's kind of odd, but I'll try it. I'll ask her to see what she thinks. And she was more than happy to do that. So then I had to take that spreadsheet that I'd built for just my then girlfriend, now wife, and I had to adapt it so that it kind of fit all these different circumstances. And so I did this, a few times for friends. And then I shared the spreadsheet, got it shared on Business Insider. And then it just randomly took off and got over 300,000 views. And I had all these strangers that were just emailing me that wanted me to use the spreadsheet to explain to them what it meant for their student debt. And eventually that turned into a business where now we've consulted on over 230 million of student loans, which is more than anybody else in the country, I think.
Travis, how much research do you have to do to create that Excel sheet at the beginning? Like, how did you, get enough information on every different type of loan repayment option to feel comfortable selling it as a service? And I know you didn't intend to do that at the beginning, certainly, but maybe this is like the way my own mind works. I would need to be pretty darn sure that I was giving the right advice. And this wasn't something that was a career for you. How much research did you do into it? Do you have other resources that you lean on that you recommend people look into? Talk us through how that works.
To make the initial beta version, I spent weeks trying to make something that I felt comfortable sharing. And I had to learn everything to make sure the formulas and the math made sense, because I can handle the programming aspect, but I had to actually understand how all the rules interacted. And, oftentimes I would make a mistake. I had to go in the spreadsheet and correct it. And initially I built the very beginning version of the spreadsheet about when I quit my job. So I didn't actually have any intention of making this a real legit full-time business. And so I was just helping close friends, and they were in deep trouble anyway. So they were just grateful for any help at all. And so it wasn't super, super formal. Basically, over the year I was traveling, I did a lot of blogging, wasn't really making any money off of that, but just was doing it for fun. And then I had to make a decision with my relationship. So my wife was moving to a new job in a new city, and she wanted me to come with her. And I said, well, I gotta do this because I love her. So I moved to this new city, and then I didn't have anything to do because I wasn't traveling or going to a new city on the road every 3 or 4 days. So then I thought, what am I going to do with my time? So I spent some time writing a book and doing more blogging. Eventually, when things got even more serious and I decided to have a sit down with my wife's father to ask for his permission to marry her, I got an answer I was not expecting. No. I thought, oh crap, this went different in the Hallmark movie.
Doesn't he know that you're retired at 25?
Yeah, and that's kind of what I brought up to him. I was like, well, I understand your concerns, but your daughter has a negative 6-figure net worth, and I have a positive 6-figure net worth, and I know
that must have went over well.
Yeah, I mean, I put it, I think, a little bit more diplomatically, but I don't remember. And I tried to say, hey, I've got all these projects that I'm working on, and one of them's probably eventually going to make money, and doing some side hustles and making a little bit of money from this part-time student loan thing, that's decent, right? And they're like, yeah, but we have no confidence right now that you could sacrifice if something happened to her and she couldn't work. And she needed to take a break or have kids or something, that you could support the family financially. And we want to see that before we give our blessing. Then my thought was, oh crap, I gotta be successful. So going back to that theme about desperation is just where I've been the most successful in my life. That's definitely true. At that point, I decided this student loan thing is helping people enough, and there's not enough good resources out there. I'm going to go ahead and commit full time to working on this. And if I'm not successful, then I have to go get a dreaded corporate job. And so when you're thinking about like entrepreneurial success, and this is why I think that Lean Fi is something that really can make sense for a lot of people. My choices were, in the local area that I was at in St. Louis, I could be successful running my own business, or I could put on a suit and tie and go work at like Edward Jones or Monsanto every day. I was just like, shoot me in the head now. And so I had to be successful. Then I just decided, well, this is what worked that first time I wrote an article about veterinarians, and I got a lot of clients out of it. So let me try to write an article like that, but write it for dentists. And then I wrote another article about pharmacists. And then I just kind of kept writing articles like that. And then I found out about Facebook ads because I accidentally spent $100 on a Facebook ad and it just went viral. I just got super lucky. So then I said, okay, well, let me spend some more money on Facebook ads because that seems to be getting me more people that want to pay me for my service. And then gradually, as my service got better and better, I felt comfortable raising the price. At the point where we're at now, I can point and say that we save people on average a projected $60,000 in their student loans because they make so many mistakes paying it back. And for those kind of savings, if you're really, really good and you're the best, I think it's okay to raise your price as long as it's reasonable and transparent and fair and everything. So I went through a couple price increases. Now it's kind of cool because we've sort of created a lifestyle design where I can work as much or as little as I want. So if I wanted to take on more work, I could lower my price and open up my calendar some more. But what I decided to do instead was bring people on and train them in my process and have them have a lower price point, and then I'll have a higher price point. So that's what's really neat about a business is if you create something that's really good, then you can hire other people to run it for you, and you can make profits while you're hanging out with your family or going out to the movies, which is just the most insane thing that I never in my wildest dreams would have thought that I would be doing when I was working for a corporation trying to get my, 4% retirement match and then go quit with an uncertain future.
I think people have over time given us permission to do longer episodes because they realize that there is so much to cover, and to try to cut something short is robbing you, it's robbing us, and it's robbing them. And that's why we're going to take the time to explore further what you actually discovered. And I'm incredibly excited about where this conversation goes. And let's set the stage that I wish that I had seen your document on pharmacists. In fact, as we go through how to pay off your student loans and the most advantaged ways of doing it, I'm actually a little bit nervous about what you're going to say because I know what my balance was when I graduated, and I know what I had paid by the time it was all said and done. I don't say this from a place of regret, very happy with my decision looking back, but I probably did not do it in the most optimized way. And there are people that honestly are looking. In fact, it's like standing on the scale after Thanksgiving, right? You're actually afraid to see what your balance is doing because you've been paying on it for 5 years, but you've just been paying the minimum because it was affordable. And it's a little bit scary to see where your balance is now. So I think this is like the perfect place for us to actually talk a little bit about some of the tools that are in your tool bag. Maybe you could just open it up. Where do we start?
Yeah. So, the first thing I'd say for your audience is if you have less than 100,000 of student debt, it actually is probably pretty straightforward. You probably can go ahead and just refinance the student debt to try to cut the interest rate and just try to pay it back as fast as you possibly can. If you have more than 100,000 of student loan debt, that's where it gets really, really interesting. So I'll give you a case study. It's actually a pharmacist, Jonathan, so you'll appreciate this.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, he was a friend of mine from college, and he just randomly reached out because he saw my article on pharmacists, and he's like, "Hey, dude, I've got a lot of student debt. I'm paying like $2,000 a month for it. So I'd love for you to just review what I'm doing, and I can pay you and all that stuff." So I was like, "Cool." I analyzed his situation. So he was working at a community pharmacy, and he was on something called the standard 10-year repayment plan. So he was on a path where he was going to pay off his whole about $200,000 of student loans in 10 years. His balance was a little bit less because he was about 3 years into that. And I told him, well, hold up, your pharmacy, it's a 501c3, which is a not-for-profit hospital. Do you know about the public service loan forgiveness program? And he said, the what? I said that, well, if you pay based off of your income, then you can have the balance of your loans forgiven tax-free at the end of 10 years of service. And he said, no, I haven't heard about that. So we ran some math, and I looked at the pay-as-you-earn and the revised pay-as-you-earn programs for him, and he dropped his payment from about $2,000 a month to about $600 a month. So for 7 more years, he only had to pay $600 a month, and under this program, the balance was projected to be forgiven tax-free. And also, the program that he happened to be on, those 3 years of standard 10-year payments, happened to count towards that program as well. So he was already 3 years into a 10-year loan forgiveness program, and he was paying $1,400 a month too much on his loans. And so the projected savings for him was 6 figures. Now, you might say, well, that's not guaranteed savings. He didn't get the loans forgiven today. I get that. But the point is that there was a loan forgiveness program that exists that probably will happen that he was eligible for. He didn't know it. And he was paying over $1,000 a month too much that could have been going into retirement savings or building assets or going for FI. And I see people like this all the time. There's people that are paying $2,000 or $3,000 a month at a $400,000 student loan balance, and they're going to be paying their loans back for 20 or 25 years. It's like, well, if you're going to pay the thing back over 20 or 25 years anyway, you might as well see if you can do one of these private sector loan forgiveness strategies where you're paying a big tax bomb on the forgiven amount instead to see if that saves you more money. So there's all kinds of strategies. Basically, if you owe less than double your salary and you're not working at a not-for-profit or the government, you should probably refinance. So that's pretty straightforward. On Student Loan Planner, there's a bunch of places you can click and get a cashback bonus and cut your interest rate. That's a pretty straightforward path. If you have what's called a debt-to-income ratio above 2-to-1, you owe more than double your salary, that's where it gets a little bit more dicey. And if the math suggests it, you can either go for a private sector loan forgiveness strategy, which is 20 to 25 years, and at the end of that period, you have to pay a tax on the forgiven amount. Or if you work at a not-for-profit or public sector employer, you only have to pay back your loans for 10 years. And then the forgiven balance in that case is tax-free. So people make all kinds of mistakes with those 3 different paths. And because it's so complicated, because the federal government does such a bad job at educating people on their options, that's how we're able to save people so much money if they owe over 6 figures.
So Travis, that makes sense to me. So if you have a 2-to-1 debt to income ratio like that, that's when you should be starting to think about these forgiveness programs. So I guess my first question is, are these programs that you apply for now through the government? Like, are they all government programs? Are they guaranteed? Are you going to wake up 24 years from now and the law changed and all of a sudden you don't get your forgiveness? Are these considerations that people need to worry about? And who can qualify? Like, you're describing both the 501c3 and those type of organizations, but then you're also describing like regular traditional jobs when there are these forgiveness options as well, which I wasn't aware of before now, honestly. Is everyone eligible for programs, or are there certain eligibility requirements? So I know that was a ton of questions, but hopefully that all made sense.
It did. Yeah. I mean, basically there's 2 kinds of loan forgiveness. Think just high level for a moment. The best kind, which is this PSLF, Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. And then there's every other kind. The best kind, let's just focus on that for a second. You have to have direct federal loans to qualify for this. So your loans do have to be federal. They do have to be on the direct loan program. For most people, that means you took it out after 2010. So all you have to do is pay based off of your income for 10 years. So you pay about 10% of your discretionary income for 10 years on one of these loan forgiveness income-driven repayment programs. And then at the end of it, the balance is projected to be forgiven. That's the best kind. Now, there's been a lot of news and scary headlines out there about the elimination of this program. Maybe some people might have seen something like that. Every proposal that I've seen grandfathers everyone in that already has student loans because these programs are written into their promissory notes. So when you borrow for school, right, Jonathan, you probably had to sign some sort of document that agreed to the loan's terms and conditions. Do you remember that?
I do.
Yeah. So in that document, if you go through it, there's actually parts of it that include all these different repayment programs and these different forgiveness programs in that document. So discussing this with lawyers, this is why they think that every proposal for repealing and replacing these different income-driven and loan forgiveness programs that we've seen have all grandfathered in people who already have the debt outstanding because you agreed to this promissory note with specific terms and conditions. Now, people who don't already have the debt haven't agreed to anything. And that's why the proposals to repeal a lot of these programs or change them affect people that are entering a graduate program starting in July 1st, 2019. So if somebody's already in school, they should be safe to use all these different strategies. If somebody's already graduated, they should be safe to use all these strategies. But if you're thinking about going to grad school in the next couple of years, you need to be very careful. So that's the answer I give in terms of the could you wake up and these loan forgiveness programs get repealed? One thing, another way to look at this is student loans are 1.5 trillion. And if you compare that to mortgage debt, it's about 8 trillion in mortgage debt. So 1.5 trillion of student loans is a massive, massive problem. If they made the student loan system for current borrowers significantly less friendly, that would potentially create a financial crisis. So in some regard, it might not be possible to make the loan programs that much worse for people who already have debt because of what you could do to the economy. So the best program, that PSLF program, just to recap, that's a 10-year forgiveness program that the balance at the end of it is wiped away tax-free. That's the best program, right? That's the one that people qualify for only if they work full-time at a government or not-for-profit employer. Now, the programs that are available to literally everybody that has a job, that's just the standard loan forgiveness programs on the pay-as-you-earn, revised pay-as-you-earn, and the income-based repayment programs. That's available to anyone, whether you're working at a Wall Street bank or you're unemployed. And the way that works is you pay, again, 10 or 15% of your discretionary income, but you'd have to do it for 20 to 25 years instead of 10, okay? And at the end of that period, if you have a low income, your balance is going to be pretty high, and then you have to pay taxes on that forgiven balance. So what I help people do is figure out, how do you prepare for that tax bomb? How much do you have to save each month to be able to pay this tax bomb? And does doing that make more sense from a math perspective than paying the loans back? And if somebody's got that 2-to-1 debt to income ratio we're talking about, like that veterinarian that had 80,000 of income and 380,000 of student debt, that veterinarian can actually reach a point where they're going to be FI one day by maximizing their retirement accounts, contributing a lot to their brokerage accounts, and preparing for the tax bomb by going for more of the 20 to 25 year loan forgiveness strategy, even though they're not employed at a not-for-profit or public sector place. So very complex, all kinds of strategies. The take-home message is that there's hope for people. Like if you have members of your community that felt like, hey, this FI stuff sounds so exciting, like I'd love to be able to save a lot of my income, but I would be literally paying 70% of my income to my student loans for the next 10 years. That person can achieve FI, and they maybe didn't think they could before.
So I would imagine that you have seen people that have $500,000 plus in student loan debt. I mean, that those sorts of numbers are out there, especially when you start talking about veterinarians, dentists, and doctors. And I'm curious, do you ever see people doing a consult with you, and after they finish the consult, they say, well, I just need to find a job at a different facility? Do you see that? And does that ever end up being the end of the consult?
I've had 4 clients with $1 million in student loans, over $1 million. So yeah, I've seen some pretty big balances. And I had a client the other day that wanted to do a follow-up consult, and I was like, oh, this is interesting. I wonder what she's going to say. It was pretty intense. She was a dentist, and she was planning on buying into the practice that she was at, wasn't very happy, and kind of felt like she was in a rut in life. She had her mindset changed based off of what I suggested about potentially looking for the Indian tribal program has this really good dental repayment program. And so I suggested maybe she look into that. And so she told the person that she'd planned on buying into the practice with that she was having second thoughts. And the person blew up at her, and she was so shocked. And this is somebody that she trusted. And the relationship apparently was based off of her making the person money instead of a sort of a genuine friendship. And then she wanted to tell me that she had quit her job. She had moved to the border of like northern, like right in the border of Canada. And her and her husband were building a cabin in the woods, and she was doing dental medicine for this like random Native American tribe. And she's like, I've never been happier. I never would have thought about this if I hadn't talked to you. My life trajectory completely changed because of an hour conversation. And I was just like, I hope this works out for you, because now I feel responsible.
One other question, as you expand this out, and it's not so much that I believe you're going to have an answer for this, but let's say you have the teacher. They got the master's in education at the expensive school. They come out, they have $90,000 in student loan debt, and they're making $40,000 a year. And unfortunately, some of that is private loans. What does the consult look like for that person?
That's a great question. So I've had people like that. I've also had someone kind of oddly, like pilots and air traffic controllers kind of have a lot of debt. And a lot of times their programs don't qualify them for the standard like federal debts. So sometimes they have a lot of private loan debt. That's a kind of an occupation a lot of people know. So what will often happen is the ratio for that 2-to-1, it all depends on the ratio of federal debt to the income. So if somebody's got 200,000 of loans and 100,000 of it's federal and 100,000 is private, and they make 80,000 a year, you have to take that 100,000 of federal loan debt and divide that by the 80,000, and then their debt to income ratio is below 2-to-1. So even though that maybe if it had all been federal, they would have been a good forgiveness candidate, because they have, a split in their debt, they're not a good forgiveness candidate, and maybe they need to actually refinance instead. So oftentimes for somebody who's got a big split, like a very extreme split, the conversation can often be more budget related. Like, how do you want to approach this? Do you want to take 15 years to pay back the debt so you can maximize your 401k? Do you want to pay this back as fast as possible? If so, this is how you're going to sell your vehicle, by putting it up on Craigslist, because I bought and sold a lot of vehicles on Craigslist. I know you can get rid of an underwater car. And then, maybe you need to move out of your house and downgrade your lifestyle there. So I actually have a CFP on staff who's an expert with, budgeting and helping couples negotiate cutting back their spending. So if it's an extreme case, then we can have them like work with the CFP, who is just, basically a financial coach, and helps them, goes through their line items and cuts back their spending so they can achieve their goals.
So it sounds like the actionable tip here, really, depending on what side of this you're on, because you have to work with where you are. But when you're looking back, going back to that earlier conversation, all the flexibility is with the federal loans. I know there's that incentive for people to look at the privates because they're just easy. It's low-hanging fruit. It requires less paperwork. You're going to get it. But from this perspective, from the flexibility that all these tools allow for you, all the flexibility is baked into the federal loans.
It absolutely is. And I would tell somebody to be really, really sure before you refinance your loans. There's a lot of companies out there that's how they make their money. So they're kind of prone to giving refinancing suggestions when maybe that's not the right path for you. And you have to be very careful, because once you refinance, all those other options are off the table. And people oftentimes don't understand this. So I have had several clients who their parents have this mindset that they have to pay back their debt. That's the only path that they have available. But in reality, this person would be paying, 35 or 40% of their income towards their student loans for a decade or more, when in fact they could be paying maybe like 7 or 8% if you optimize their income by maxing retirement savings and things like that. So it's just a total mindset shift. The one thing I'd say too on the other end is I've also seen people that are very high income earning professionals that maybe they have 150 or 200,000 or 250,000 of student loans, but maybe they have the nice problem of also making $250,000 or $300,000. And I've seen people that want the flexibility of the federal government programs almost a little bit too much. And I've seen people pay back their loans at a 7 or even 8% interest rate because they like the idea of having these government protections. And I think that's a little bit too cautious. So there's definitely this point where, here's a good rule of thumb. Look at the standard 10-year repayment amount for your loans. So you can actually log in and find this out. Like, what would be the payment if I had to pay these things back on this 10-year standard path? If you're not working for a not-for-profit or a government employer, so that PSLF program's off the table. So if you look at that number and that number would not be that big of a deal for you, then that's a great indication that private refinancing is something that you need to look into. If you look at that number and you're like, oh, that's really hard, I do not think that I'd be able to comfortably pay that every month, then that's a great indication that you need to be very, very cautious before you refinance, because you can't take it back.
So Travis, it sounds like you really need this plan first. That's the most important takeaway I'm coming away with, which is you need to understand your options, where you are and where you might be going, right? So if you make that decision to refinance, that's irrevocable, basically. Like, those are now private loans. You lose all that flexibility. So I get that. For people looking at the forgiveness programs, it sounds like the incentive would be to not pay off additional principal, right? Because they're going to be, remaining amount is going to be forgiven at some point down the line. Is there any interplay there where sometimes people do pay off additional principal? Is there ever an instance where that would make sense? Or is that just you pay the minimum you can, and that's just that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, because that's one of the biggest mistakes that I see is there's two ways to pay student loans that make sense. Either as aggressively as possible, like Jonathan did, and get out of debt in ridiculous amount of time and just throw a ton of money at it to just be debt free, or be extremely strategic and pay as little as possible, trying to have the biggest forgiven balance possible, because that results in the greatest present value savings on the loans. And what most people do is they take this in-between path. So they say, okay, my income-based payment is $800 a month. I'm going to pay $1,200 a month because that makes me feel better, right? What that does is that just sets you up and oftentimes to have a forgiven balance anyway, which makes no sense because it's costing you money. Because if you're going to pay 40% of some number eventually, because that's 40% is the tax bomb amount that you'd have to pay in the forgiven balance. Why would you pay $1 now and receive 40 cents in the future? That makes no sense. That's irrational. Yet so many people do that. The flip side is, if you're going to get out of debt, freaking get out of debt. Don't mess around. Like, this is a big thing hanging over your head and preventing you from doing the stuff that you guys talk about on this Choose 5 podcast. So it's like, why would you mess around with big student loans and just pay just enough to cover the interest? That's a big mistake that I see happen all the time. So for the listeners here, you really want to decide, do you want to be on this aggressive paying it back as fast as possible plan or this passive plan? And if you're going to be on the passive plan, I think we would really be able to help you, because there's a lot of things that people don't know about how to optimize this and minimize your adjusted gross income to minimize the student loan payments and maximize the forgiveness. And if it's, the aggressive plan, like a lot of your listeners will probably be like, well, I just want to refinance. Like, people can just send me an email and I'll just try to point you out to where you could get a good deal for free on that if you're sure you want to refinance.
All right, Travis, man, you brought your A game today, and this was fantastic. You've put together concepts and ideas that I've been grappling with how to explain to people. Those questions that I asked you, those aren't made up for me. There are faces attached to each one of those questions that I asked, and this is information that benefits them directly. And I know if I have people in my life with those questions, our audience feels the same. So this was an incredibly relevant conversation. People are going to have follow-up questions. They're going to want to get more information about what you're doing, and they're probably going to want to get your input on their particular unique situation. What's the best way for people to reach you?
Just send me an email. It's just my name, Travis at studentloanplanner.com. And it doesn't have to just be about massive student loans. It can be about anything, about any of the story. I'd love to hear from people and just kind of hear where they're at in the journey.
And guys, for the record, if it hasn't come through already, I just want to reiterate that Brad and myself are blown away by what Travis has put together. We think that if you're relating to this or are in a position where you have this 6-figure of student loan debt, you have this 2-to-1 debt to income ratio, we think he's the guy and you should go check him out. So to try to make that as easy as possible, we've set up a short link. Just go to choosefi.com/Travis. That'll take you directly to his page where you can get his personalized advice. And I think it would be worth your time to consider doing so. Travis, now normally that would be the end of the episode, but on this show, we would love to give you the chance to tackle the hot seat. Are you ready for this?
Yeah, let's do it.
In a world drowning in debt and rampant consumption, trapped by the chains of lifestyle inflation, these questions highlight the secrets of those who have broken free. Welcome to the Choose FI Hot Seat.
All right, Travis, question number 1, your favorite blog that's not your own?
Physicianonfire.com.
Nice. He is a big favorite of ours and a good friend of the community. So wonderful blog indeed.
And actually, I was talking to him recently, Brad, about getting him to come back on the show to talk about donor advised funds, because that's something that he has just crushed over the last couple of years.
Yeah, actually, I used his article to set up my donor advised fund at the end of 2017. So yeah, I'd love to do that. He also mentioned something about Social Security bend points. So I think, I think we can definitely have POF on the podcast in the very, very near future.
All right, Travis, question number 2, your favorite article of all time. Now, this can be one that you wrote or somebody else's.
I think the 0 to Hero in one post on the Mr. Money Mustache site, just transformational to take somebody that had no idea what FI is and shows them a totally new path for their life.
It's a tried and true favorite. Question number 3, your favorite life hack.
ordering only one entree at restaurants because they give you too much anyway, and then you save money and you split it with your significant other.
I love the frugal hacks, man. I think that my appetite overrules my brain sometimes, but I totally get it. I'm thinking about, as I was doing research in your story, I got so many just cool little tidbits of some of the other little frugality hacks that you implemented in your time in Europe, and I'd love to hear just a few of those as an add-on to this question.
Well, one thing that I found is certain kinds of produce like cucumbers and carrots and rice cakes are the same price everywhere, even if you're in Sweden and a hot dog costs $10. So if you're in a really expensive city or place or country, just know that you can always go to the grocery store and eat cucumbers.
Nice. So that's a meal, just a couple of cucumbers?
Well, maybe some peanut butter, put it on the rice cakes, balanced diet, get some other things, maybe some multivitamins. But, when your choice is a $15 Big Mac or something cheaper, my very cost-conscious version of myself when I was watching my withdrawal rate said, go to the grocery store and get something cheaper.
Well, I think grocery store is probably just a good hack nonetheless. Don't go to expensive tourist places, right? And go to a local grocery store, especially not right in the middle of a city center.
Yeah, when I was in Switzerland, that's when I was joking about the $15 Big Mac. That's literally how much it costs. And so you can do that, or you can go to the grocery store where carrots are still like €2. And then you just saved a massive amount of money. And the only decision you made was not buying a freaking hamburger. So it's really amazing. No matter what kind of city you're in, even if it's one of the most expensive cities in the world, there's always ways that you can save money on food.
Highlighting your story, Travis, is really the story of the early retiree. I think it's I'm going to tease you a little bit, but it's like the stereotypical story of the 25-year-old FIRE individual and people from the outside looking in saying, what the heck are you guys doing living on $20,000 a year? How is that sustainable? And they're looking at the single individual and saying, I've got a wife, I've got kids, I've got all these other things. And I think watching your story evolve, and I'd love to bring you back on at some point to talk about it further. Now you're married and maybe there's kids on the horizon and your lifestyle does adjust with this to some degree.
I was joking with my wife that I need to write a sequel to the book 30 is the New 25 and talk about how my safe withdrawal rate now, I'm going to have to spend $60,000 a year instead of 20. So my portfolio needs to be based off of that withdrawal amount now.
It is interesting how the messaging does kind of change as you get older and have additional life circumstances. But I think it actually adds dimension and it doesn't invalidate anything that you said earlier. It just adds an interesting complexity to it. And that's what I love about it. So, all right, Brad, you want to go ahead and lead off with the next question?
Sure. Question number 4, your biggest financial mistake.
I bought a car that was $11,000 in college that I never should have bought. I should have just drove a $2,000 Honda Civic, which we drove when we moved to St. Louis for the first time. But instead, I had to have the really cool looking Chevy. It was so beautiful. I thought I'd be such a badass driving around town with these really nice wheels. And the sunroof started leaking. I couldn't get it replaced. The transmission had all these problems. I had all these expenses, and I had paid way too much for the vehicle. And so I ended up just having to put a bunch of duct tape on the car to prevent it from leaking. So I basically had a car that was worse than like a $2,000 or $3,000 car, but I paid like 5 times for it.
It just symbolizes all of your financial failures in this one particular vehicle. It actually is the perfect example of consumerism gone wrong, because you say, oh, I've made it, I'm going to buy this. And then this exact thing that you've sacrificed, I guess you've probably done the math as an optimizer, what that money would be worth now. It's symbolized by a leaky roof, a problematic transmission, and a slowly dying rust bucket.
One of the happiest days of my life is when I sold it to somebody I met on Craigslist for like $5,000, and I said never again.
Brad, in the meantime, is still driving his 2003 Honda Civic.
Yeah, I am. It's great. We're going on, 15 years now. It's incredible.
All right, question number 5, the advice you would give your younger self.
Relax a little bit and know that things always get better.
Wow, Travis, that's succinct but deep wisdom. I like that a lot. I'm gonna think on that for sure.
And we do have a bonus question for you. And let me set the stage with this. We spend a lot of time talking about what we're not spending money on. In fact, in your case, you have a book highlighting how you spent less than $20,000 a year. But at the end of the day, all of us do end up making purchases of value to us. Sometimes it's a win, sometimes it's a loss, but we all have examples of this. And the question is, your favorite purchase that you made over the last year, let us know what it was.
The engagement ring from my wife.
Very nice. And dare I ask, is there any sort of extra additional story that is tied to that?
Oh, yeah. I had her input in helping me select it. We ended up probably only spending about $600 on it, but it was this gorgeous ring that we got custom designed on Etsy. I presented it to her, and the stage was perfect. I was in front of this gorgeous art museum with this beautiful reflecting pool, and I got down on the wrong knee, and I opened the box, and I opened the box upside down. She couldn't see the ring, so she looked back at me with a face of confusion, and then looked down in the reflecting pool and said, "Oh my gosh, Travis, there's a dead fish floating there." And so that was my engagement story. Luckily, she said yes, and luckily we're still together.
Well,
so
let's circle back and highlight the fact that I'm assuming that implies that her dad said yes.
He did, and now they're one of my biggest fans. And I joke that as my business revenue goes up and up, they love me even more.
Travis, thank you so much for coming on the show, man. This has been a total blast.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is so much fun.
Brad, this is the episode I have been waiting for. This is the conversation that I've tried to have with people, but Travis brought it all together. I mean, that's what it is. You find people that can speak to a very specific point, and Travis has figured out how it works.
Yeah, I mean, student loans are a big deal for so many millions of people. And to have Travis speak to it from within the FI community is kind of a cool new perspective for us. So I think he's extraordinarily knowledgeable. That came through. He's a nice guy. He's a member of the FI community. So yeah, he's going to be a resource for us going forward for sure. So very, very excited about this.
To our audience, I hope this was an episode that will save you or somebody you know tens of thousands of dollars. How cool would that be? One single podcast, change the trajectory of your debt repayment life. And huge thank you again to Travis for coming on the show. If you want to support us in what we're doing here at Choose FI, here are 4 easy ways. 1, leave us an iTunes review. If you want to do that, just go to choosefi.com/iTunes. 2, use our page to sign up for travel credit cards. If you want to travel the world with miles and points instead of your hard-earned dollars, then just go to choosefi.com/cards and get started today. 3, if you're working on the milestones of FI, set up a personal capital account to track your progress and use our affiliate link. It's completely free, and just go to choosefi.com/PC. P as in Paul, C as in cat. And 4, and most importantly, find your friends, coworkers, and family members who might be open to this message and tell them about the podcast. Have them start with episode 38, The Why of FI, and right behind that, have them go listen to episode 21, The Pillars of FI. It is a fantastic starting place. All right, my friends, the fire is spreading. We'll see you next time as we continue to go down the road less traveled.
You've been listening to Choose FI Radio Podcast, where we help middle-class America build wealth, one life hack at a time.